The year is 2020. The world has been hit by a global pandemic. A singular new hairstyle has been invented, the COVID cut. Everything has changed, so why not have a techie deliver a talk about selling?
Welcome, my name's Ivan Reedman and I'm here to speak to you about cybersecurity, in particularly how it can be a unique selling point when competing in a heavily saturated market, especially with things such as IoT. Obviously a little bit about myself. I fundamentally come from an engineering background, so I look at cybersecurity from an engineer's perspective. Very aware of the challenges and constraints placed on engineering teams, certainly when it comes to consumer products and the rapid speed of development, agile methodologies, etc. What I am conscious of is that agile doesn't end up fundamentally meaning cutting corners, which is ultimately what we need to avoid, certainly when it comes to requirements and a systems engineering methodology. So, first things first, we'll just go through I'd like to run through a number of fairly standard IoT devices with you. Smart doorbells, IoT cameras, IP cameras effectively, and smart plugs, or not so smart plugs as the case may be. And then just give the team who did all the fantastic research that I'm talking about today credit, because ultimately they're the ones that have done this amazing work, and I'd like to thank them for it. And then let's look at the solution. How do we solve the sorts of problems that we're seeing? And then we need to discuss how cybersecurity is an investment, not an expense, and how you can actually leverage that when you're competing in saturated markets. And how do you turn your cybersecurity posture, or a good cybersecurity posture, into a unique selling proposition? First things first, let's look at doorbells. Yeah, smart's an interesting use of words here, isn't it? Look at this. Look at the article. Video doorbells letting hackers into your home. All right, that inspires confidence, doesn't it? And this is on Which magazine. So the team that's done the work has done a number of articles and some research for Which and other publications, but this particular one's been done for Which, and they looked at numerous doorbells. So we stepped through some of the issues that they found. Some of the doorbells communicated audio and video data to the cloud completely in the clear, no encryption. Not even authentication, straight through to the cloud APIs. So that means anybody in between the camera or the microphone in the doorbell and the cloud service could see and hear everything going on. Now, if you step through what that really means, your doorbell at your front door could be listening and streaming video and audio of you having private conversations at your front door or near your front door to some cloud provider in another country. Anybody in between your doorbell and your internet connection and the cloud API endpoint could monitor that traffic. Any sort of network capture tools would record all that traffic, stick it off into logs. That's pretty terrifying. That really appalls me. So what does the press have to say? And this is what it all comes down to. When you're trying to leverage your good cybersecurity posture as a unique selling proposition, you need to make sure that the press is not going to write articles like this about you. Smart doorbells could be hackers' key into devices into your home. That's by the Telegraph. Smart doorbells that can help burglars. Daily Mail. Smart doorbells let hackers into your home. The Times. They're all fundamentally the same. They're all based on the Which articles and the Which research that was done, but they highlight the reputational damage that can be done from by not having a good security posture, and then somebody, us or security researchers, PhD students, or those with nefarious intents, pulling these devices apart and seeing just how bad they are. Now, I want to highlight these devices are not inherently good, and therefore people spend an inordinate amount of time to hack into them. These assessments were relatively light touch, just by having a look, by pulling flash chips off, having a look what's there. The amount of information that could be obtained from these devices so quickly is terrifying. The team did some great research, but it's also important to put it into context that these devices were not designed in any way to be secure. IoT cameras, so IP connected cameras. What can you say? The little Ethernet Wi-Fi, so either Ethernet cabled or Wi-Fi connected cameras that people are using. You put them up around your house for security purposes. You think you're doing a good thing. You use them as child monitors or room monitors, monitoring your pets while you're away, all that sort of thing. fundamentally, so many of them are so insecure. Now, all I can suggest is that you have a look at the articles. I've included all the links so that you're aware of the source material. This is probably my favourite one. IoT smart plugs. Yes, they're IoT, and yes, they're meant to be smart plugs. I suppose they're slightly smarter than a plug with a switch on it, but certainly not safer. So this was particularly concerning. Cheap smart plugs could expose you to hackers or even cause a fire. Now, this is another great piece of work by the research team. This is a Which article. There was a number of smart plugs that were, or one particular one that was actually recalled and stopped being sold by Amazon, I believe, not actually recalled, but they ceased sale of it. We went to try and purchase another one to do some more testing on. They were no longer available, which had become aware of, which is great. It shows which is really driving change in this area. The issue here with this particularly scary one is that one of the smart plugs, yes, could cause a fire and could potentially electrocute you very easily. But the smart plug itself, when we looked at the flash contents inside it, stored the latitude and longitude of where it was installed. Why does a smart plug need to know the GPS coordinates of where it's installed? Yes, it hasn't got a GPS receiver in it. I'll qualify that. But for some reason, when the device is configured, either via the app or however it gets there, we didn't bother looking into that. There was clear text, as in not encrypted, contents in the flash that had the user's Wi-Fi SSID, the password, account credentials, and the latitude and longitude of where it was installed. So when we use that information and do a geo lookup, it pointed straight to the house of one of the research team who was doing the work on the device. I'm speechless. Why that information's there, I have no idea, but it shows how terrifying the security posture of some of these devices are. Okay, so let's look at the safety issue one. Okay, Hickton, just how bad can it really be? The safety issue here is that mains neutral, as you can see from the picture, just a large lump of blobby of solder, actually is connected to the electronics ground plane. So that is the negative line or the ground that runs throughout all the control electronics. And you can see the other arrow pointing to the shell of the USB socket. So this device has two USB sockets on the front, and that particular pad that I'm pointing to is one of four means that those shells are connected to the ground plane. There is direct continuity, as in a direct connection from mains neutral to the shell of the USB socket. So that basically means that the mains neutral line is exposed, and if you touch the USB socket shell, you are actually touching mains neutral. There are plenty of older places where active and neutral are wired up back to front on the sockets, in which case the shell of the socket then is actually wired directly to mains live. Yes, lethal. If there's no RCD, then simply by touching, RCD as in residual current device, the safety switch that kills power if you happen to touch or potentially get electrocuted. If there isn't one of those in an older place, then you're getting a main shock directly off this device. So yes, it can cause a fire, it could ignite itself, or it could kill somebody. It is that serious. It's absolutely appalling. Which did an amazing job and got this device taken off the market straight away. Sorry about the pun, but it's absolutely shocking. The independent engineer who reviewed this product for us called it that cheapy Chinese kill you with a bang bang device. I don't think he was particularly impressed by the quality. And I do apologise in advance for this next bit, but for anyone with an electrical background in the audience, this is just a series of puns. Based on the current situation, I could not resist the temptation to make a shocking pun about such a positively charged issue. That should not have anyone alternating their current opinion about the importance of safety. I said it's just a bit of a gag. I apologise for that. So what the news had to say. Smart plugs sold on Amazon, a fire risk. That's on the BBC. That's international. That's absolutely everywhere, which has a fantastic following anyway. But you get somewhere like the BBC or New York Times, it's everywhere. So yes, that product needs to be recalled, but even the security issues, these are getting picked up and put everywhere. So therefore, if you do not have a good security posture, chances are it's going to be exposed. So if you do have a good security posture and you're investing in security, you can leverage it because you're competing in a saturated market where people are competing on price. Well, you don't have to. You can compete on other more important aspects. So the second article from the Daily Mail: smart plugs sold on Amazon, eBay and other popular online retailers are vulnerable to hackers. Yes, absolutely. Every single one of them were, and could start fires. Okay, what else do you say? Really, what else do you say? Okay, so credit where credit's due. As I said, the team that's done the research, meet Dale, Paul and Guy. Great bunch, really great bunch. They have worked tirelessly and diligently testing all these devices and finding some amazing exploits, as well as picking up all the low-hanging fruit. So all the things that any moderately well-trained or security-trained developer should not have, or should have prevented in the final product, shall I say, rather than using lots of double negatives. So what do they have to say? Let's have a look. So Dale, obviously they've written a bit there, but I've highlighted the key points that I believe the key points in yellow from Dale. Sending keys over Zigbee using the default Zigbee key. Okay, that means anybody with knowledge of the default Zigbee key, which is, just Google it and you'll see it, could decrypt the Zigbee network on those devices. Yes. Basically, there's no point having encryption. If it's the default key, there's absolutely no point. And then obviously, a number of other bits and pieces, but these devices even store the GPS coordinates of the user. Why? You throw one of these plugs away, somebody gets all of your credentials, account logon details, potentially passwords, and where your house is. Great. Guy, from Guy Morley. None of the firmware was encrypted. HTTP communications were used extensively, and plaintext passwords provided a widespread disregard or lack of education about security. I think that brilliantly sums it up. I really do. Guy's personal opinion, attitude after delving into these devices is there are very few devices that he would trust to be on his network. So after doing all this research, the researchers at least have a very good idea of what they can actually install. And then Paul. Out of the 6 doorbells, smart doorbells tested, none were particularly smart on security. I think that's really important. Now, this part I've highlighted and I want to make a point to it. Shenzhen manufacturers and their associated cloud service providers forming a complex and hard to trace foreign supply chain. So Paul's talking about accountability seems to be a real problem because of where these come from and how they're collecting information and where they're shifting information to. When the supply chain gets that complex, it's very difficult to trace what's really going on. Okay, so what is the solution? It's actually relatively simple. You engineer it securely. It's easy to say, isn't it? Yeah, it's very easy to say. Doing it is somewhat more difficult. I use this slide all the time. Anyone who's seen me talk before knows that this slide is in every single every single presentation I do, and there's a good reason for that. This is a quote of a report released to the DoD, American DoD, Department of Defense, in 1970. Yes, 50 years ago. This may be 2020 and maybe a most bizarre year for all of us, but this is 50 years ago. This is 1970. And fundamentally it says, system security is a design problem. You don't add security, you design it in. This is in 1970. A combination of hardware, software, communications, physical, personnel, administrative, procedural safeguards is required for comprehensive security. In particular, software safeguards alone are not sufficient. And that last line sums it up. You cannot simply patch everything through software. You've got to engineer things securely. And the fact that people are still relying purely on software solutions, a little bit of an indictment on clearly there's not quite enough education on how to do this properly, so hence the more and more of us are talking about it. You all know what engineering is. I'm not going to go through the Wikipedia definition of it, but fundamentally the creative application of scientific principles to design or develop structures, machines, blah blah blah. Okay, well, engineering branches and disciplines: chemical, civil, electrical, mechanical, software, interdisciplinary, and security engineering. It's a really important fact. Security engineering is an engineering discipline. Okay, so once again, I'm not going to go into too much detail. This talk is about unique selling points, not about engineering disciplines. But so I updated the DoD statement to make it a little bit more current. I did this last year. So security is a systems engineering problem. So I've changed the original DoD statement, or the WARE report statement, to a systematic application of security engineering principles across hardware, software, communications, physical, personal and administrative procedural aspects of a product lifecycle is required for comprehensive security. System security is engineered in from inception. Implementing security towards completion, particularly relying only on software, is simply not sufficient. Exactly the same content, but making it a little bit more current and focusing on systems engineering. I want to make sure people are aware proper systems engineering methodology can capture and solve these problems. Next, let's look at a very generic systems engineering methodology. You identify the need. What product are we going to build? You define how it needs to, or what its requirements are. Define what it needs to do. You specify the performance. How is it going to do it? You analyze and optimize. So these things go round and round in circles. You design and solve. Now, this is the important part. Design and solve generally means where you're building or writing software, you're doing electronics, you're building cloud services, etc. So that's important. Verify and test. Well, you've got to have test cases. What sort of engineering methodology doesn't have test cases? And then, more often than not, we're seeing IoT providers and cloud-based providers and web companies relying on penetration testing to validate they've actually implemented the security properly. The problem is, doing it properly, you should have the test cases to understand if you have met all of your security requirements. Okay, so the penetration testing results are fed into design and solve. Okay, that's not where it should go. Absolutely not where it should go. It should go back into define requirements. When the results from a penetration test are fed into requirements, you're feeding in symptoms back into requirements. You then have to generate test cases, or you generate requirements to mitigate the root cause of the vulnerabilities. So vulnerabilities are just symptoms. Vulnerabilities are symptoms, potentially multiple vulnerabilities are symptoms of one root cause. So you define requirements to help deal with one root cause problem at a time. You then specify the test cases. Now you've got all these requirements, you specify test cases. So now the next time your cycle goes through, you verify and test against your own test cases. You solve the root cause problem. You make sure that your engineering methodology is correct. You make sure your processes are correct. Your peer review processes to make sure your software has actually met all the requirements. That sort of thing. And yes, penetration testing is still absolutely required, but then it is a validation phase. It is not your security phase. It is a validation phase that everything else you've done is correct. Okay, so how do we convert the ideology that cybersecurity is an expense? It's an expense budget. No, it's not. It's research and development budget. It's an investment. You invest in cybersecurity, you get a return on your investment. And expense is just something that you spend money on. On the left, we have expense-based product development. You can see the results from penetration testing is fed into design and solve. This is the patch culture. You're not capturing requirements, you're not learning from the mistakes, and you're not improving your processes. The fundamental issue here is that you are taking symptoms, vulnerabilities found in penetration testing, and asking the team who wrote the software, software development team or whatever, to fix them. So they're going to look for those particular instances and fix those particular problems. More often than not, the symptoms get fixed. So then you do a retest and it's fine. However, the root cause of the problems can still be there. Just because a vulnerability isn't found doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Just because you get a clean penetration testing report doesn't mean your application or your software or your hardware, your widget or gadget is secure. It simply means that because the penetration testing team is time bound or time limited, they simply may not have found it. Doesn't mean it's not there. They might just need to dig deeper. So fixing one root cause may fix 50 issues. Fixing one vulnerability won't necessarily fix the root issue at all. You could have one root issue, lack of compiler-based mitigations as a simple root cause, resulting in stack overflows and all sorts of other things. But that is a mitigation. Fundamentally, your root cause is the fact that your code's been written in such a way that a buffer can overflow. That's the root cause. Not the fact that there's one particular instance where it has, the fact that it's been allowed to exist, that is the issue. So on the right-hand side, we have investment-based product development. We take the results from penetration testing, so mistakes learnt are fed back into define requirements. You then generate the requirements and it flows all the way back through the systems engineering methodology back to verify and test. So the next time round, even a minor update you do to the application by capturing the requirements, when it comes to verify and test, you are then making sure in your own development lifecycle that the issues found previously no longer exist. That's a return on the investment. You're spending money, you're getting a return. So the definition of investment, the action or process of investing money for profit. Okay, so on the left, you're spending money, you're not getting a return, you're not making extra profit out of it, you're simply trying to mitigate concerns. On the right, you're investing money, you're spending money, and you're making more profit, because the more times you go through this cycle, the faster and better you get, the less reputational risk you need to run. The cost of dealing with a data breach or a hack all over the newspapers is astronomical. Well, that cost is taken away from your profit. So by definition, investing in cybersecurity and actually learning from your mistakes is investing. That's an investment, just by definition. That's what I'm saying. It's really important to understand that you invest, you do it properly. You don't patch, because that's an expense. You learn from your mistakes and get better and better. It becomes an investment. Any commercial person should be aware that you need to spend money to make money. Well, you're going to make a lot more money by not having massive breaches on your hands. So how do we use this as a USP? So anyone who's not familiar, anyone pretends they're not familiar, USP is a unique selling proposition. Okay, so let's have a look at this simple chart. What your customers want, what you do well, and what your competitors do well. Your USP is what you do well overlapping with what your customers want, not what your competitors can do. So if we go back to the smart plug, the doorbells, the cameras, clearly what your competitors are not doing well is security. They might beat you on features, they might beat you on price, they might beat you on functionality, they might beat you on performance or battery life. The thing they're clearly not doing well is security. So if you're competing in a saturated market, so this is bizarre coming from a techie, if you're competing in a saturated market, you need to focus on security, because that is a unique selling point that you can do well because you can invest in it. If your competitors aren't investing in it, then you've got an upper hand. By selling on trust, and I think this is really important, by selling on trust, you end up building a better relationship with your clients. Okay, so a question for both sales and engineering staff, as you can see. What is the USP you use to win business? Now, most people say it's something to do with the business. It's broad answers. Our service is better, our product is cheaper, our product outperforms competitors. I've already said you may be right, but chances are when you're competing against offshore manufacturers, your product's not cheaper. You might think it's better, but that's subjective. And your product, you say, outperforms according to what characteristics? They're often subjective, unless you're talking about, the diffraction of a lens in a 20 megapixel camera, for example. Things you can quantifiably measure is one thing. Whether or not consumers care is another thing, and I think that's really important. So you need to sell on something people do care about. You need to sell on trust. So now answer these questions. How do you answer your clients if they ask about your product cybersecurity? And do you know the extent of risk associated with a cybersecurity incident, as in getting hacked? So a good sales team has always sold on trust. You don't sell a product on functionality. You don't sell a service on what you can do. You sell a service or product based on the client's trust that you will solve their problem. Most clients will want you to solve a problem, and they want to trust that you will do it properly with the right quality, good after-sales service. Those are all trust propositions. That's how you build goodwill. That's how you end up with repeat business, and that's how you stop competing on price in a saturated market. Customers are becoming or consumers are becoming more and more security conscious. They're more and more aware of their data being breached. Look at the articles. Do you think that global media would be covering these articles if consumers weren't interested? This is how you can end up using your cybersecurity posture and investing in cybersecurity as a USP. And like I said, it never was, honestly, it never was sufficient to purely sell a product or service based on functions. Good salespeople build goodwill by selling on trust. Your clients trust you. Okay, so to sell on trust, you must earn trust. And that's fundamentally what it is. You can lose trust very, very easily by not doing something properly. It's very, very hard to regain your client's trust. Certainly if you want to sell a premium product. If you don't want to be competing on price, if you want to sell a good quality product with better margins, it's challenging. You need to earn that trust and maintain that trust. So you really need to invest in cybersecurity. And ultimately, as I've said there, by not competing on price, by the very act of not competing on price, you're selling with higher margins because you can go 5% above your competitors. Yes, okay, they might be 5% cheaper for widget X, but if your customers trust you to manage their data and their video and their content securely, I don't think you'll have too much argument from people. Help your salespeople understand, your marketing people understand, that's why they should be using cybersecurity as a USP. Help your clients understand that's why they should be purchasing your product. They can trust you. That is important. So cheap transactional products, like I said, you're competing against low-cost products. You don't want to be competing purely on price. Okay, so last question for you. Think really hard. What is the alternative to having a good cybersecurity posture? It's pretty self-explanatory, isn't it? Look at the articles. Do you want your product or your brand on one of those? No, I certainly wouldn't. In summary, security is a design problem that's been known about since before 1970. The report was published in 1970, so the report was worked on for some time before that. Security is an engineering problem. You engineer in securely. You do not add security. You don't add safety. You engineer a product safely to be safe. You engineer a car to be safe, to fail safely. You don't build a car and think, oh, this is awful, now let's just add safety to it. It doesn't work that way. Neither does security. And fundamentally, if nothing else, learn and remember to sell on trust. To sell on trust, you need to earn your clients' trust. To earn trust, you need to engineer your product securely, your services securely. So you need to invest in cybersecurity. That's me. Thank you very much. I believe we're heading to a breakout room after. Like to ask any questions or whatever else, I'll be there. Thank you.